Well, welcome everybody to this webinar, Adobe Analytics to CJA and what you need to know. I'm Scotty Hagen, one of the VPs of Analytics at Northern and also a partner. Today, we have joining us from Thrivent Asset Management, Manager of Marketing Analytics, Dave Klein, and from Adobe, Senior Product Manager of CJA, Derek Tangren. Today we're going to focus on prepping for CJA and kind of thinking through what a successful implementation of CJA and providing some of those tips and tricks and things to think about along the way as you take that journey. And so going to jump right into this. And if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll leave some time at the end to go over those questions. And then, again, really appreciate everybody coming along and getting some great info out of here. So I'm going to turn this over to Dave Klein and Derek Tangren. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Scotty. As we kind of think about this process to go from analytics to CJA, right? The biggest thing that I asked myself when we started our migration and kind of other folks that I talked to in the industry, right? It's all about continuity, right? How can we make sure that our analytics implementation is as close to the implementation that we're going to get out of the system from a CJA perspective? Right? And that continuity, what it really means, we want parity, right? We want to be able to have no changes in our measurement strategy. We want to have no changes in our understanding of what is being recorded on the site and being tracked between the two systems. We want it to be accurate, right? We want it to have dimension values that end up being the same in analytics as in CJA when we want them to, right? We want to make sure that we can have those valid comparisons between the systems. Want to be consistent. I want to make sure that my shareholder dashboards and reports don't change too much, right? I don't want to have to retrain a whole bunch of people on changes that have happened because of the migration, right? And lastly, I think everybody's goal is how can I make the move and with the least amount of effort possible so that I don't have to spend 2 months doing the migration and with all of the QA work and everything else, right? So when we went to do the migration, really what we ended up doing was mapping out a process similar to what's here, right? We took the analytics SDR, and from that we created this one-to-one dimension map, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And then once you have that map, it really facilitates creation of the WebSDK SDR, so you really know exactly what dimensions and where the data is going to come from. You can then leverage that SDK SDR to implement WebSDK and start getting the data in AEP, right? And then once we have the data in AEP, we're going to set up connections with the web data as well as other pieces of data to make this data set. And then we're going to enable data views on that data set to actually custom curate the metrics, dimensions, and anything else that we want to measure within those. And data views are very similar to the concept of the virtual report suites that we had in Adobe Analytics. And then from a workspace perspective, workspaces then are going to read these data views and kind of present that normal usability layer that we see in analytics, right? So for us, the path to success was really getting a team that can straddle both the technical understanding of what's happening in the background. So technical understanding of analytics, technical understanding of what's new and changed in the WebSDK environment, as well as getting to the business objectives to make sure that we don't lose sight of why we're enabling all this tagging, why we're getting moving to the new system, right? And whether, all of those people can be found in-house or you try to find a partner that can help you through that process. The next big step is planning. And this is where I can't stress enough. You can't under-plan the migration. And for us, that really was, using the APIs and outputs from analytics to get as complete SDR as possible, right? all of the standard dimensions that get collected, all of our custom dimensions, and then pulling out the WebSDK standards, SDR standards from Adobe to start doing the mapping and making sure that we are getting as much coverage as possible between the two, right? And once we get that WebSDK SDR, that really is the blueprint for the rest of the CJA implementation, right? And when you're in this dimension step, mapping these dimensions out, this is a great time to take a step back and say, are there places in our SDR that could use a little help? For us, that meant things like forms. We had really disparate ways that we were capturing form information. And so the schemas within AEP and really make it easy to put that information in a group and keep all of that information together so that when you're in CJA or in other tools, you know exactly how that data rolls up and kind of how it's getting collected, right? And so that was a really good point for us to do some of that migration from lifting and shifting perspective. Right. So, once you do that migration, there's, the key really was that one-to-one dimension map, right? And so let's kind of go over what it unlocks today, right? And so from our perspective, we're a really small team, and we really don't have a lot of extra capacity to start retraining not only the analysts, but all of our business partners, right? And so the beauty of CJA is you can set up the metrics, dimensions, and reports exactly the same way in CJA that you had them in analytics, right? You have this one-to-one dimension map. You can take it and literally just bring up segment builder in CJA, say, okay, what's the new dimension name? What were the values in the old segment? And you can actually just recreate those segments verbatim, one for one from analytics into CJA, right? And so you have this really great way to build everything with the same language that you used before. You can create the same segments with the same names, metrics with the same names, workspaces with the same names. So there is no retraining necessary other than getting used to how to kind of look up if with the dimension name changes due to the schema within AEP. Derek, I assume it was intentional, but have you heard about other teams benefiting from the similarity of the environments between analytics and CJA from a workspace perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And hey, everybody, really happy to be here and be talking about this. Dave, at the beginning, you talked about continuity. And what we've heard is that similarity, yes, completely intentional. We did that on purpose. What we've heard, the similarity really helps reduce some of the friction that teams have when shifting over to another tool. So we've heard that teams don't really feel like they're completely starting over because they can use the same workspace kind of general patterns, kind of like what you're describing, that they already know. And then for some customers, they can use that against a much broader set of customer data. So what that I think translates to is some of the things you touched on. There's less retraining, able to get adoption faster in association with that. And so that really does make an easier path to move from Adobe Analytics into CJA. And then once people are more comfortable with navigating that, it could be renaming of dimensions or variables. There could also be additional variables that the organizations decided to bring in. Then they can really start to take advantage of some of the larger CJA value, cross-channel analysis, journey views, taking a much broader view across the customer journey with that, and some of the more flexible data modeling. So again, completely intentional. But yeah, those are some of the things we've seen.
Well, we appreciate it since it was intentional. Makes it a lot easier for the rest of us.
Cool. Well, I'm happy to kind of jump into this next bullet point and stuff about understanding marketing better. So The new CJA architecture has also allowed us to do some pretty exciting things. One of those capabilities is something we refer to as derived fields. It allows you to create transformations which get applied at report time instead of as the data is coming in and getting processed. What that means is that these rules get applied to your entire data set as the report is being processed and run. And so it can apply retroactively to all of your data. So this obviously has particular application as you develop your marketing channels logic. The initial configuration doesn't require you to have to wait for the data to flow in so that you can validate that it's working properly. Additionally, if you need to iterate on that multiple times, you can do that very quickly and verify that it's working because it shows up instantly as soon as you update those rules and apply that logic to the dimension. So another one of the cool benefits of CJA is that you're not limited to the number of metrics and dimensions in the same way that you are inside of Adobe Analytics. You have these concepts of kind of the base fields that you build your metrics and dimensions on, and you can take a single field and use it multiple times, or you can take a field and use it as both a metric and a dimension. Where this comes in for marketing channels is that you can take a single field that you've developed the logic for with derived fields, and you can create multiple versions of that for your reporting. So you can easily have multiple marketing channels with different attribution models to get a broader view into the performance of your campaigns and your users' customer journeys. So super powerful, some exciting things. We've tried to make that a lot easier. So Dave, I think people may be interested to hear kind of what your experience was with some of this.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I think, just like any other business, we do a lot of marketing analytics, obviously. And I think the cool thing with the derived fields is you aren't just stuck with derived fields based on an existing dimension or something that you've built into the analytics, right? It's pretty awesome that you can also take derived fields and make derived fields off of other derived fields, right? And so you can start to do things like, one of the things that we set up was looking at, okay, if I'm in this visit now, right, I know what my current channel is, but what was the channel from the previous visit, right? And so with the derived field, you can pull in marketing channel and say, all right, now go back in their visit one and tell me what their channel was, and create a dimension where you're concatenating the previous marketing channel and the current marketing channel in a single dimension value, right? So no longer do you have to kind of pull these two and break it down. You can actually just create a single metric with that derived field to actually see that show up in Workspace. It becomes pretty powerful when you start to think about that just from a marketing perspective, right? You're not just limited to marketing. You could start doing it with referrers. You could do it with page names. So you have this really flexible way to create all of those derived fields.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here, Dave.
Yep.
And was there anything that you weren't thinking of when you started down this journey of putting in CJA that was a benefit that was like a surprise, like hey, this, not an Easter egg, but something that you were, hey, this is better than I thought? Was there something in there that caught your attention almost immediately?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I noticed, and it's hard to exactly explain the reason why, but when we moved to CJA, what we really started seeing is dimension values and the counts from the dimension values were almost always higher in CJA. And so I think with the SDK and CJA and the way that it gets implemented, the data quality is better because you don't have as many timing issues that you might have had with that measurement and you didn't even know they existed, right? And so we would have some dimension values that might be off by 5%. Well, that was it's off It's higher in CJA by 5%. Well, that was because it's just collecting more data than at measurement did. So
as much as I'd love to say it was the tool, could have been Northern and their help. All right, continue on.
So yeah, I'm happy to jump in kind of the expanded partnership between the CDP and the CJA. Really what you get out of using CJA is the ability to actually just use it to create audiences, right? Just like in analytics where you had you have the checkbox to enable the segment in other Adobe tools, right? Like Target or something else. In CJA, you have the same checkbox, but that just creates the audience, and that audience then flows over to the CDP where it can be leveraged. You can leverage it in Target, and you can leverage it in other places. So it makes it really easy for you to do analysis, come up with all of these audiences, and then share them back to the CDP and leverage those there, right? And then once you start using the CDP, right, you can start to send those CDP audiences into CJA. So you don't have this problem of, oh, I've got this audience. Well, now how am I going to analyze it and understand what the behavior is of this audience and kind of what's coming out of this audience? You can actually take those audiences and put them in CJA and do all of that performance measurement, right? I think next, Derek's going to take us through advanced analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. So we have several capabilities that we've released this year that really help support more advanced analysis use cases. One of these is full table export, which allows you to take a report in Workspace and export the full table of values for that, even if you've got millions of rows of data in association with that. Additionally, we also continue to expand on what's available in derived fields. Now, earlier we talked about marketing channels specifically as derived fields is a way of solving for that. But there's a lot more to get excited about derived fields. You can use it for things like concatenating different values together, searching and replacing values in different fields. You can build entirely new fields based on customized logic, like if-then statements based on some of that. Some recent enhancements include the ability to determine the time between two events that occurred, and there's a lot more that's in there. Again, all of these transformations get applied at report time so that they're instantly available and fully retroactive to your full data set. We've also released something recently called multi-dimension columns, where you can have multiple columns of dimensions in your reports. This really is a game changer for the types of analysis that you can do directly inside of Workspace. And in addition to being able to kind of line up the different columns, you can then, on top of that, also do breakdowns, as well as apply some custom sorting logic to the columns. So again, lots of things that we're trying to bring to the table to help meet some of these advanced analysis use cases that people want to do. So I guess, Dave, for you, are there any capabilities that have stood out to you that you've enjoyed?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. One is removing that limitation on data export, right? I think that is a huge win, especially since before in analytics, right, you'd either have to run a data warehouse report to get it out, or you would have to, if you're fluent in the API, you could use the Oberon debugger, grab that API call, go out, paginate everything, and pull down all million rows if you had that much, right? And so you no longer have to rely on those API connections to get all of the data. And so that's a huge win. I think I'm super excited about the adding those 5-dimension columns in freeform. I think the big thing that it really allows you to do is it reduces the complexity of the workspace, because breakdowns, right? You add a summary row, you get all of these things. And a lot of times when you're doing analysis, you just want the row of the values and not necessarily the summations. And so it really makes the data that you get out and the manipulation of that data much easier. There is a great video out on the analytics YouTube channel that goes through that change. You can just search for it out there. That's where I first learned about it. So I'd take a look at that.
Great.
We're going to move over to taking a look at, now that we kind of understand where we're using the tool now, what does this enable for, right, tomorrow for us, right? We've got a lot of the easy wins out of the way, like what does it unlock for the future? And I think Derek's going to take us through the first one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dave. So another area that we've tried to add a lot of flexibility in with CJA is with data views. Dave had talked about this a little bit earlier, and how they behave in some ways like virtual report suites in Adobe Analytics, but they also have some enhancements and some things that are different. So again, you can curate the data view with just those metrics or dimensions that are pertinent for different groups. You can divide up, your reporting that way. It is, or it can be, all based on the same underlying data. So it continues to reflect consistently across those different data views. We've also developed some advanced data stitching capabilities, which allow for better customer identification, and even being able to replay that data and add in the person ID to those rows where they were previously not known. And so you can jump back. There's different look back windows or replay windows that we allow, like a 7, a 14, or even up to 30 days, which we're also looking to expand some of those things that are pretty cool. We're also investing in things like our data insights agent to help make data more accessible to other parts of the business, as well as technologies like MCPs. And I get a little excited about MCPs, partly because we just released those for both CJA and Adobe Analytics just a couple of weeks ago. And so it allows you to connect your LLM of choice, be that Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or whatnot. And what it then allows you to do is interact with your data in that way. It's built and based off of the APIs. And so there's a lot of opportunities to, it's opening up, I think, a lot of opportunities to work with data in some new ways. So Dave, again, I'm kind of curious, is there anything in this area that you're particularly excited about or looking forward to?
Yeah, I think obviously the AI parts, we'll be looking into that pretty heavily to see how we can leverage some of that to kind of ease even our business team asking the right questions and getting the answers out and not laboring the analytics team. I think I'm really excited actually about the way that data views can be leveraged to create views specific for each of the businesses that we partner with. And so we might have a data set that we only want to show 30 dimensions in, right? Remove all of that complexity and make that environment that they're using as easy to use as possible. And not only that, when you create these business data views for each of the business units, right? They're easy to manage. You can transfer the metrics and segments with the shared metrics and dimensions functions within CJA, so you don't have to recreate everything, right? But the other thing is provisioning and giving permission to those data views is really easy inside the admin tool, because you can actually just give permissions at the data view level. So you can give all the permissions from a tool perspective separately, but then just say, well, this group or person is only going to be able to see this version of this data view. And so it makes it really easy to kind of tailor the access and the permissioning around those data points that you want to include, right? The connection has everything in it, but the data view, you can start to kind of peel back and really condense down only the right dimensions for whoever's going to view that data. So
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think, and thanks for reminding me about the shared metrics and dimensions. That's there's a lot of power
Yes.
that we've got there to reduce a lot of the overhead that can come along with that.
Yeah, and the cool thing to point out about the sharing of those metrics and dimensions is that's actually at the connection level, not in the data view. So if you have multiple data views leveraging the same connection, it's really easy to go into the shared metrics and dimensions function and share them with the other data views and make sure that they're all enabled and you can see them everywhere. And so you only have to create those in one place. You no longer have to, okay, is this segment built in this particular report suite? And then I gotta make sure that it's viable for this other report suite, and then maybe have two versions of it that I'm gonna maintain or something else. This really is a huge time saver going forward.
Yep. I think that's great. You remind me too that derived fields is the same way. So they're at the connection level. So like if you're building out a marketing channels report, then all the logic behind that is all sitting at the connection level. So if you're using that across data views, it's going to be the same thing. You're not going to have to rebuild it for everyone.
It's great.
Cool. Well,
a quick question.
I've
obviously seen this deck, but Derek, from you've seen a lot of implementations. You obviously work really closely with the CJA team and part of that team. What's one of the use cases you've seen, like a client use CJA that's, you're kind of not surprising to you, but just, hey, there's a lot of value there. There's a, like even something you might not have thought about that CJA was capable of.
Yeah, one pretty interesting use case that we came across. We were working with a company. They had fairly recently switched over to CJA, and they were in the process of migrating their loyalty program. And as such, it was a large effort, and there were all kinds of things that were changing, including the names of the different tiers in association with that. And so the analytics team, it was kind of stressing them out because, you have these legacy values that exist. I want to report on, what my different loyalty tiers, how they're performing. As they start throwing in new names to that was going to represent some challenges for them. And so with flexibility with CJA and utilizing some of the capabilities that we've talked about, it took them about a half an hour to go in and create a rule to basically map all the legacy values to the new values, and very, very quickly be up and running with reporting, where it's something that would have taken a much longer amount of time to configure like that in a different system. So that's one that comes to mind.
Speed to value.
Yeah.
Awesome.
100%.
All right. Well, great.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'll keep going maybe with this next bullet point about understanding and delivering the full marketing or the full funnel marketing ROI. So again, one of the areas that we see our most successful CJA customers doing is bringing in other sources of data next to their web data to get a broader view of what's happening in their customers' journeys. Now, this is something, again, that we've been very intentional about in terms of the architecture CJA and how we've designed it in order to work very well, not only with web data, but with other sources of data, other types of data. I'll share just another customer example. In this case, it was a retailer that they had brought in some of their store data that helped them uncover some potential cross-sell opportunities for people that research things online and then purchase them in store. So what it was, people were searching for 2x4s online, but they obviously weren't purchasing them online. So they could see a lot of searches happening, but no purchases happening online. As they brought in that store data, they were able to see that downstream conversions and even the marketing efforts associated with that. Whereas before that was they were kind of blind to that. But in addition to being able to see the marketing success of anything that they may be doing to drive traffic to people looking for 2x4s, they were then able to see, okay, well, when people are purchasing in store with 2x4s, they're also getting some other things like snacks and those types of things, which were some great insights that helped them kind of optimize for those types of users and what they were doing, not only online, but also in store. So I guess at a high level, the funnel can then look more indicative of what the customer's actual journey is, regardless of the channel they may be interacting with. So I was talking about a retail version. You can pull in things like call center data. You can pull in CRM type data, these other sources that starts to unlock some pretty interesting things. And being able to, again, to your point earlier, Scotty, being able to get to some of those insights faster than you would maybe with another tool. So you can then, on top of that, you can take those insights and integrate them into some of your targeted messaging across the Adobe ecosystem using things like Adobe Journey Optimizer. And so you can, if that's something that you've got access to, you can then just expand kind of the activation and the things that you can do there. So, Dave, as I've been thinking about this, I'm curious how you see this as different than what we've kind of done historically, or how does this change things for you?
Yeah, so I think the big thing for us is with CJA, I don't have to export the data from multiple tools anymore to get an idea of how we might be performing with our funnel, right? And so I'm sure most everyone on the call here has had to just use summarized data to say, all right, I'm going to measure the number of people that came to the website. I'm going to measure the number of people that did a conversion. And then I'm going to pull the data, say, from some other place, maybe it's from your CRM system or wherever, and say, well, this many people we got emails to, and this many people we got subscriptions from, right? But you're really just pulling the summary data from each of those different sources with no connection between them and saying, like, this is the actual funnel that is really happening. And so in CJA, when you start bringing in all these data sets, you make this transition from a funnel based on summary data to a funnel based on people actually going through that funnel. And so I think that becomes really powerful from a performance perspective, as well as an understanding for us as marketers or digital analysts to really think about, well, what are the things that are happening and what are the decisions that are being made either in a particular session or visit or by the person as they go through this funnel, right? And so that's really brings it back to this idea of the customer journey, and you can actually look at that journey and everything's attached from a journey perspective there. And so I think that just gives us a lot more options from an analysis perspective.
Absolutely. Yep. Love it.
All right, I'm going to hop us over into personalization. I think the CJA really gives us a couple of great levers from a personalization perspective, especially as we start to look at Adobe Target. And so unlike Adobe Target with analytics, where if you create a segment in analytics, right, we talked about it earlier, that you can click the box to make this audience available everywhere so people can leverage it, right? You can leverage it in Target, but you can't really use it in Target for targeting somebody on their first visit, right? It really takes Target a second visit to determine if they were actually in that segment in the first visit, and then they can target them on the second visit. Now with WebSDK and CJA in the mix, right, there is no lag. You can actually do personalization and targeting in real time based on the segments and audiences that you define with CJA, right? And it really becomes super powerful then when you can analyze this. You know what your use case is and what you're measuring against for the benefit. You can really start to say, all right, well, I'm going to target this exact audience, and I'm going to go out and do these things and personalize the site, and start to measure the impact of those performance changes or those UI changes that you might be making. I think the next thing for us is really with that turning on of the segments and transferring them from CJA into the CDP, right? Being able to leverage those segments in other tools, not just Target, but now in Marketo, right? So you can start to pass those audiences over to Marketo to start to get at email lists and email targeting that you might not have been able to kind of see before without the connection based on the individual. And so it really expands the usefulness of that analysis that you're doing on your CRM and how it kind of goes into your other tools, right? Derek, as we think about the personalization, what can you tell me about I think it's relatively new, the ability to directly transfer CDP audiences into CJA?
Yeah, we in the documentation, I think we refer to that as audience analysis. So if people are looking for details on that, I think it can really help teams understand how their existing CDP audiences are actually behaving across the customer journey. So instead of having to recreate those audiences, kind of like you mentioned, Dave, instead of having to recreate those inside of CJA, you can bring them in directly and analyze things like audience size, the overlap, engagement, pathing, conversion performance, those types of things. And so what we hope is that that's going to mean that marketers and analysis can stay aligned on the same audience definitions while moving much faster to being able to do, going from activation to insight. So it's a really strong way, I think, to close the loop between who you targeted and what they actually did. Today, the experience is built around the latest state audience insights. So that's refreshed every 24 hours. So the state of that audience. And what we're looking at doing is expanding with broader time-based analysis planned coming in the future with that and stuff. So some great capabilities now, but some even more exciting things, I think, are on the horizon for what we've got planned there.
Well, we really look forward to it. It's really nice to be able to just use the same system to analyze the audiences instead of pulling it out, trying to marry it up, and then trying to analyze it in some other tool. It's really great. As we look at, the tool, and I think the last bullet point here is on enhanced support and kind of machine learning. The team that I head up and our team in general at Thrivent Asset Management is a relatively small team. So we don't have a lot of data scientists, or any for that matter, unless you count myself. And so really what CJA is bringing to the table for us is the ability to pull data at the person level, right? If in analytics, you had to know ahead of time that you wanted to be able to pull dimension, the ECID as a dimension, right? So you in a standard workspace, you can't pull ECID into a freeform table or anything else as a standard in analytics, right? You have to set up an EVAR, you have to pull it in, you actually have to map it on the front end, do all of that work, right? In CJA, you don't have to have it as a dimension. It's automatically a dimension that is being captured and that you can actually leverage straight out of the box in Workspace. So you no longer have to have a separate dimension that you're capturing for that. So what that allows you to do is, as I've done machine learning before, some of the hardest things are, how do you summarize data for an individual across wherever you're going to get that data from, right? And so you might have to, let's say you want to say the number of emails that somebody got. Well, then you'd have to go to the email system, pull out all those people, marry it back, do all the joins, get it all back together. It's a lot of work to pull all of this data together by the person. And so what we can do now in Workspace is, without the role limitation that we had before, I can just drop in ECID, and using all of my custom metrics and segments, right, build out the exact behavioral summary that I want by person and export it so that I can do machine learning and advanced analysis outside of CJA when I need to, right? Now, the other hard part is, with any model, is if you start modeling some things and you do it outside of the tool, right? How do you actually get that so you can activate it and use it internally? Well, that actually turns out to be relatively easy in CJA as well, because you can just take that model, say you're looking at defining a particular audience, right? And you're doing this machine learning to figure out this audience. Well, if you know the people, you can actually pass that, what you're calling that person in your machine learning algorithm at the person level. You can just create a lookup table in CJA and then put that back into the connection. And then you can actually just enable the analysis with that directly in CJA, as well as, again, just clicking the button on the segments and sending it into the CDP. So there's a really easy way to start expanding your machine learning. And it doesn't have to be super complicated. You can actually just get it right in and pull it in and see how things are laddering up and where people fit within your ecosystem. And so I think that's a really powerful thing for some of the smaller teams, and probably will be for some of the bigger teams as well, especially around being able to use all of those custom metrics and everything else. Now it really is. Before, you would have to run data warehouse report after data warehouse report with the segment applied to try to get this role level person information. You no longer have to do it. You can just get it right out of Workspace. And I know you touched on it before, Derek, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on, really where we see the MCP support coming in from a CJA perspective, and how we think that can kind of open up the advanced analysis and machine learning.
Yeah, great question, Dave. Just concur with everything you've said on this point. I think that MCP support is especially meaningful, especially for those small teams like that you're working with, and we've got a lot of those. And what we're finding, or at least what I'm seeing, is that a lot of teams are being asked to do a lot more with less. With this idea that, well, let's use AI, or let's try to make you more efficient with that. But I think MCP support's meaningful because it's going to give, like you're describing, it's going to give an easier path into some of this advanced analysis without needing a huge specialized team behind the scenes. It opens up CJA also to other external AI tools and custom agents, so that teams can automate more of that heavy lifting. And you can ask, some deeper questions through that. Now, I don't want to overstate. So MCP is not going to do the machine learning on its own, right? But it does make the CJA data easier to use inside, a machine learning or agent-driven workflow. So I think the win again for smaller teams, it's faster access. It's being able to reduce some of that technical overhead that exists with working with some of the data. And really hopefully provides a much more practical path to being able to do some of these advanced analyses that you get and stuff. So yeah, I'm excited to see, as you guys are switched over, some of the things that you'll be able to unlock with some of this. And again, this is super fresh, the MCPs, and anxious to hear feedback from people and what what cool things you're able to do with it.
Yeah, I think the one thing from an MCP perspective, right, is for some folks, right, getting permission to use specific machine learning tools is difficult, even the ones that might be already in Adobe, like Data Insights Agent or something else. And I think that MCP can really help if you have an approved LLM, figuring out how you can connect that to your data, and then everything gets leveraged according to your company's permissioning and legal requirements. So I think that's the big win from some of the bigger companies that have those kind of policies in place too, is you're using the approved tool. You're not, okay, now I got to figure out how I'm going to get permission to use machine learning inside CJA or someplace else. So
yeah, and you're not moving the data around at all.
Right.
You're just querying the data in a different way, right?
Yep.
And that's pretty cool.
Cool. All right. Well, you guys want to move on to some questions?
Yeah, that's the end of it anyway, Scotty. So
yeah, no, perfect. Great timing. We got a couple questions coming in. I actually have a couple myself. I'll start with you, Dave. It was a very successful implementation, on time, on budget, and you're already seeing that value. What's one thing you might think about doing differently now that you've been on this implementation journey?
I think the one thing that I missed when I was reading things is, when you're in that first phase and you're really doing a lot of the planning, derived fields are really awesome. They're really powerful, but the thing to keep in mind is you can't rely on it for your entire implementation, because you can only use 5 derived fields in a CJA workspace at a time. And so if you end up creating a whole bunch of things with derived fields that you thought you would be able to marry up and break down or even display in the new way, right? You can't do it beyond 5. And so that limitation is not just on showing the dimension in a freeform table, it's also in the metrics too. And I can understand the limitations there, because it's probably pretty complicated to get those derived fields to work. But I think it's just one thing for you to keep in your cap of, don't over engineer derived fields, be specific on that plan of what you're actually going to capture. So,
okay, great. Over to you, Derek. Question about, and this one came in, budgets are tight, and Adobe is moving, customers to CJA from Adobe Analytics. What's your thought on prepping? If you can't necessarily sign a deal now with Adobe to get you to CJA, is there a couple steps you would recommend in preparing for, CJA?
Yeah, great question, Scotty. And I think Darren in the chat had kind of touched on some of this with his question. Moving over to WebSDK. In addition to giving you some benefits on the Adobe Analytics side as well, that's going to be a great prep in terms of getting you ready to be ready for CJA. That's probably number one, I'd say, in my mind. And I'd put a link into the chat as well. It's got some additional details. I mean, every organization's in a little bit of a different place and stuff, and so that tries to provide some additional thoughts of, depending on where you're at, what might make the most sense. But I'd say, for your question, Scotty, I think looking at migrating over to WebSDK, again, it's going to give you benefits just generally, even from a page performance perspective and such for Adobe Analytics. But it's also going to set you up really nicely for if that's something you're considering in the future to move over to CJ.
Okay. And so, and you may have answered this in your just response there, but more specifically from one of the questions from one of the attendees, and it's kind of twofold. Can you just switch the destination to CJA if you're sending to, Adobe Analytics, and then did the data feed still work?
Yeah. Happy to touch on both of those. So, I wouldn't say it's as simple as like you're flipping a switch. I wish it was that simple, but we're not quite there yet, and such. What we typically recommend, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be adding an additional data stream that's going to be collected into Adobe Experience Platform that is, the underlying data architecture and the data foundation of where CJA goes. So you have a customized schema that you can design and to meet your needs, and so with that, we typically recommend that you have both Adobe Analytics and CJA running for a period of time, kind of an overlap, so that you can do some validation work. Dave, you might have some perspective on this as well, that you can chime in with. But yeah, so again, I'd say it's not completely a switch over. You kind of have this overlap period, but yeah, there is some work in terms of setting up your schema, setting up a data stream, sending that into a data set inside of AEP that then CJA can access with some of that. So anything you'd add, Dave?
Yeah, I think our team took a little bit different route than I think. So we did not move to SDK first. So we were still using app measurement for Adobe Analytics. And so it used to be, I want to say probably 5 years ago when we were first when I was working someplace else, kind of do the migration, and you couldn't run both app measurement and WebSDK on the same page at that time. And so that hurdle has been removed. And so we took the option of if you do that, you can't run Adobe Target on the pages. So during our migration, we actually have Adobe Target turned off, and we're still running app measurement and SDK at the same time. And so you don't have to, for all those folks out there wondering if you have to switch to SDK and then make another hop and send it into AEP, you can do it all at once if you're willing to turn Adobe Target off while you're doing the migration. And so that really, for us, was a huge winner, because that QA work of making that first switch to SDK, right, and QAing everything, and then switching on for CJA was just going to be too big for us. So yeah, and again, it can vary by customers. There's a workflow where, especially if you're digital only and you don't necessarily plan on needing a modernized schema, you can use something called the Analytics Data Connector to bring data in. And so you're actually porting over the analytics data directly into CJA. That's a light lift and an option, but you don't get to take advantage of some of the things with WebSDK if you're still in app measurement. From a schema modernization perspective, you kind of leave that behind as well. But for some customers, that's a completely viable option, just depending on the circumstance and stuff. So, yeah, thanks for surfacing that up. And even on that point too, Derek, I think we are using that even to get our historical data from analytics, so that we can actually marry it all up and have a completely historical view within AEP and CJA. And so you can map those analytics dimensions to wherever you've figured out in the one-to-one dimension map into the schema, and then you can just hook it up and actually get exactly the same data from a historical perspective. So it's really nice to be able to stitch all that in.
Yeah, great point. So, Scotty, let me touch on, I know we're getting close on time.
Mm-hmm.
Let me touch on Darren's other question about data feeds.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we're in active development for CJA. So today, as of right now, this minute, we don't have a data feeds equivalent inside of CJA. But that's probably the top or near the top request that we have. And so we've got one of our product managers that is fully dedicated to working on that, hoping to have a version of that out, hopefully before the end of the year. With that, timing with that might be a little different. So nobody hold me to that. Things change. And sometimes we get into it and things get, we find out that things are a little bit more complex than we thought. But a couple options. You can use the full table export to get some of that. As Dave mentioned, you can pull in the person ID. You can pull in a timestamp. We have a value called event depth that you can also order it by. So you can order some of that and then get some of the metrics and dimensions in association with that, kind of at that person level. If you need unprocessed data, you do have the ability to get that unprocessed, so non-CJA processed data directly out of AEP. That's another option for some customers. I would say most customers want the CJA processed data though. So we understand that that's a super high priority again for the data feeds, but there are some I guess workarounds or temporary solutions to try to get some of what people need in the meantime and stuff. So,
well, I feel like we had our own little mini sneaks there, something coming up, and we got 2 minutes left. Is there a feature that's that you can share, Derek, that's coming up that you think is going to get people excited about going to CJA real quickly?
Let's see. So I'll share a couple. One of them is going to be for both Adobe Analytics and CJA. I hope that's okay. But we're working on something called sub-event segmentation. So the ability to create segments at a level lower than the event level. So that's it's kind of a nerdy one. So there may be use cases that people have out there for that. I hope. I know there are. I don't know if anybody on the call has them. So that's one. Another one that is coming out pretty quick within the next couple of weeks is we have a new version of the Data Insights agent that has taken leaps and bounds forward in terms of being able to help and answer questions. We've got some other things planned with that. Other enhancements like root cause analysis and proactive insights where, while you're asleep, it can be churning on your data and you wake up and you've got, okay, go look at this, this, and this. These are some interesting things that you might want to consider. So, awesome. Some interesting things that are coming along that.
I love a product guy. You just ask for one and you get 5. I love it. Over and delivering. But anyway, I know we're out of time and really appreciate everybody's time here. Derek and Dave, longtime friends and colleagues. But thanks for your time and the discussion today. Anybody that's on the webinar here, we'll get this out to you. Please feel free to share. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. But everybody have a great rest of the day. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Scotty.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Scotty. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Derek.